On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. We are the official podcast of the Lot 1 Tailgate Party, which is at Lambeau Field every home game. This is episode 79, created August 19th, 2024. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota, and Neil out on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight I'm having from Castle Danger Brewery, George Hunter Stout.
And in honor of training camp, in the Guardian hats, I am having the Conehead Haze Hazy IPA from Zero Gravity.
And in a surprise move, I've got a beer tonight from the Point Brewery in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. It is a Lakeside Vacation Ale. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. And just the audio is available on Apple Podcast as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. Well, it's the preseason, and that's what we get to talk about. 2 preseason games under our belt. We'll take a look at the upcoming home game against the Ravens, maybe talk a little bit of tailgating. What else is going on with this new season? A new kickoff structure. And yes, we are going to start our own preparation for cutting down the rosters. We'll take a look at some of these player position battles and see where things go. But for right now, a dismal effort in Denver, a 27-2 loss. But we learned a few things, I hope, about this team from the game last night.
Yeah, we learned that we don't want to watch any more preseason games. I think the Packers last night were about as good as we have been in our pre-recording takes or early takes of this recording. So what do you have to say about the game? I mean, obviously everyone was looking at the Michael Pratt versus Sean Clifford battle. And after Sean Clifford basically shit the bed in the first half, we were hoping that Michael Pratt was going to take control. And unfortunately, Michael Pratt did not take control. And it was a lot of bad throws. It was a lot of short throws, a lot of missed passes from both of those two quarterbacks. And we could go through statistics, but they really don't matter in this case. They just were terrible.
You know, I like Pratt's size and his poise as a pocket passer, as a quarterback, but there's a reason he dropped, as far as he did, as far as the draft pick goes. He didn't have a terrible career at Tulane. He's just not NFL ready, but that's more mental than anything else. I think the physical skills are there. He's got some zip on that ball. Not only can he throw a short pass hard and fast, but he's got a deep ball that's going to work as well. He's got the strength. He's got the physical skills to play the position. Now he's just got to get up to NFL speed.
But that begs a question. So if something does happen to Jordan Love, who do you go with? Who do you keep on the roster? Who's going to be able to fill in a regular season game against the first team defense and do well? I mean, obviously there's going to be a drop off, but still, I mean, who do you trust with the offense?
I think this goes into the whole thing that this roster was basically, we look at what was done in the offseason. It was done for, let's make a run this year. And it's obviously going to depend on how long Jordan Love is projected to be out. I mean, we're not going to be a 17-0 team. We'll make those predictions in a couple of weeks, but what's good enough to make the playoffs? What's good enough to position ourselves? And is somebody going to be good enough to fill in the games that they need to fill in and, not expecting to win every game. And I think that that's really where it is we've got to look at that long-term potential in the end, because I don't think either of them is set up to just come right in as a backup quarterback who can go and take command of this offense immediately. We've got to basically say that, okay, if our backups are going to play, they're going to do some spot duty and we're going to lean on the defense. We're going to lean on the running game.
I think that you stick with Sean Clifford just because he's got the year under his belt in the system. Some philosophies that you're looking at here. How much money are you spending on your quarterback room? There's a lot of money on Jordan Love. Ideally, Jordan Love is our guy all season. He avoids injury, perfect world kind of thing. Sean Clifford at the moment is the guy who's going to be the number 2 quarterback. He's going to come in if needed. Michael Pratt, you have to hope that when cutdowns come, he's unprotected for a little bit, but you're able to get him back on the practice squad. I always feel like there's kind of an unwritten rule between NFL teams that you're not going to poach each other's quarterbacks, so to speak. And part of the logic there is you've got a kid who you're trying to get NFL ready, and he's just spent how many months on your playbook. It's not going to benefit him to get coached and put on on an active roster somewhere and then try to get up to speed on their playbook either. Same thing going in the other direction where we talk about, do we try to get someone different in camp? There's not enough time. I mean, the one year where they ditched Vince Young and whoever the other kid was that we had, and they brought in Seneca Wallace and Scott Tolzien, boy, was that, it just didn't work out. And the quarterback position is just one of those positions you can't do that.
John, I understand everything that you're saying, but on the other hand, I think that there's going to be no problem with dropping Sean Clifford and him going onto the practice squad. I don't think that's the case with Michael Pratt. I think that he's got enough physical talent that he's shown that I don't know that we're going to be able to sneak him onto the practice squad. I think you keep Pratt, you could put Clifford on the practice squad because I don't think anyone's picking him up based on his record. And if there's an injury, then you can elevate Sean Clifford and have that discussion at that point. But I think you've got to think in terms of where you're going long-term, and long-term, I don't think there's any question it's Michael Pratt.
I agree, Neil.
Again, with that, I'll go back to what I said earlier. There's a reason Michael Pratt dropped, there's a drop off in quarterbacks in this last draft, and that's why he's down where he is. But again, there's probably one, we have one more game this week. We're definitely going to get to see some playing time from each of these guys to see who's going to move into that position. But the other thing about the preseason is we don't really get a lot of complex looks, whether it's offense or defense. To give you an example, I heard Wayne Larrivee on a sports talk show this morning, in fact, and he said, in talking to Jeff Hafley about the game, Hafley said, they ran 3 vanilla defensive coverages in Denver, just in the game as well as in their joint practices, because they just don't want anyone to know what defense they're running this year. And I think that's kind of true the way we watched that game. I was like, this just doesn't look like a very exciting team.
Although I thought they did look a lot more exciting in the previous game against Cleveland, and there were a lot of stunts going on. There definitely was motion going on that looked very different from our defense last year with Joe Barry. And I think that they are practicing some things. Although I would also add the counter to that is I doubt that any of the other teams we're playing are doing anything crazy as far as trying to trick the other team. So it just becomes talent on talent, and that doesn't really argue very well either.
Neil, there's got to be a rule that you're not allowed to say Joe Barry any longer. Not at least without warning.
We need a swear jar that's a
yes,
Joe Barry swear jar.
Joe Barry swear jar. Excellent idea. Or we all drink when you say Joe Barry. So running backs, this is an interesting room because I don't know if AJ Dillon is going to make it on the roster.
That's the other question I was kind of going around in the press. So you had 31, 32 guys that didn't suit up in the game in Denver, AJ Dillon being one of them. Does that mean he is one of the roster locks? And the other thing that came around is he had a little issue with altitude. I don't know if they officially called it altitude sickness, but it affected him, which is really bizarre because he's a conditioned athlete, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Altitude sickness can hit you at any time. I had it one time. It's very bizarre. But the thing about last night's game is Emmanuel Wilson had this opportunity to really shine, to say, hey, I should be number 2 or number 3 on this roster. And it didn't come around for him.
He looked better than anyone else on the offense, to be fair. I mean, then there weren't holes that were created. And Emmanuel Wilson looked good against the Browns as well. So I think Emmanuel Wilson has done basically what he did last year during the preseason. And the question is that going to convince the powers that be that he should stay on the roster? And I think for the reality of this is that it's going to depend on what the roster situation is for Marshawn Lloyd and whether Marshawn Lloyd starts as one of the 2 designated players on injured reserve that can come back in the season. So that's a change in the rule this year that any NFL team can put 2 players on the injured reserve on the cut down day, and those players can go back. Previously, you had to keep them on the roster for a day before you could put them on IR and allow them to come back. So the talk is certainly that 2 of those Packers rookies who've missed a lot of action are going to be those initial IR guys. And if Marshawn Lloyd is one of them, I think that's where AJ Dillon makes the roster.
Or it depends on how he plays this coming Saturday also. I mean, do you think he's going to get a lot of reps?
I think they know what AJ Dillon is. That's the thing, right? And the Cleveland game was a perfect example. We had a 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1, and then 4th and 1, All of them went to A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon got 0 yards on 3 consecutive plays. I think that is the most damning body of work as far as this new A.J. Dillon is concerned. And the question is, are all the other things that A.J. Dillon does sufficient? Were there things that were missed from a blocking perspective that obviously the coaches are going to know that are more difficult for us to identify? What is A.J. Dillon capable of contributing in the team? One of the things that was stated is that A.J. Dillon is better at pass blocking than Emmanuel Wilson is, and he's also better set up as far as catching the ball out of the backfield. And it's those other parts that the coaches see, thinking about how the team's going to come together, that are going to determine what his fate is.
Well, he's a better pass blocker really than any of the running backs. But now that tips your hand, right? If AJ's out there, he's out there to block most likely. I think there was a pipe dream at one point in this offseason where do we get a true fullback in AJ Dillon and put him in that role? And I don't see that evolving either. So it will be interesting to see. They got him on the cheap for 1 year. He's not necessarily a lock to make the team. And it's one of those things where I think Packer fans are so endeared by him. Nobody wants to go out and say he's not making this team, that we're probably rose-colored glasses taking a look at AJ Dillon.
I mean, the real question is Emmanuel Wilson going to provide different things than you're getting from Josh Jacobs? And I think that's the thing. If you look at the core skill set, it's kind of a Josh Jacobs skill set. And is that providing that value added that you might get from an AJ Dillon?
And add to what you said too, if Marshawn Lloyd ends up on an injured reserve to start the season, now your three running backs are Jacobs, Dillon, and Wilson most likely.
Going from one kind of crowded room to an even more crowded room, the wide receivers.
Well, the good news is that we've got 4 that are absolute locks, and the whole discussion's been, well, who's the Packers number 1? That obviously Matt LaFleur hates that question. And but Reed, Wicks, Dobbs, Watson, whatever, those are all 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D, whatever you want. And the question is, after that first 4, where do you go?
It's one of those things where we can talk about who's number 1, but we're blessed that we're also talking about who's number 7. Right? The possibility that this team is going to keep 7 wide receivers, and the possibility that one of those 7 is not Samori Toure. Even just looking at the depth chart, with you've got Watson, Wicks, Dobbs, Heath, Reed, and Melton being your top 6, and I think Grant Dubose is really showing things off in training camp and in the games here. That I think, and you look at kind of play late in the season last year, Toure just has really dropped off from where he was as a rookie.
I don't think there's any point in even playing Toure at this point. I think that what he showed at the end of last year, combined with what Melton and Heath showed at the end of last year, what Dubose showed, for example, against Cleveland, where he did that double toe grab to keep the ball and stay in bounds. I think that Dubose has shown that he has a different skill set and is capable of competing to be in that group. And certainly I think Dubose is the seventh wide receiver that I would want after Heath and Melton. And I just don't see the point of Toure.
I agree with you. Unless something spectacular for Toure happens again this Saturday, or if he sees any playing time. I think if he doesn't see any playing time, we sort of have our answer there as well.
I think they're going to play him no matter what to determine practice squad. I mean, a lot of the second half against Denver was just determining who's going to be on the practice squad. And I think that's the real question is Toure going to make the practice squad?
And I'll even go a step further and say if they only keep 6 wide receivers, I feel like Malik Heath is the next guy on the chopping block. I feel like he had a great preseason last year. He certainly worked his ass off to make the team last year. Then once the regular season showed up early in the season, you could tell he wasn't NFL speed ready. He was great preseason speed, but not regular season speed. He picked up a little bit later near the end of the season, but I think he really got overshadowed by Bo Melton late in the season last year as well. And if we look at kind of that overall body of work, along with the progress that Dubose is making, I think if they keep 6, Dubose is that 6th guy, and Heath ends up on the outside looking in.
I think that's the key, John, is that overall body of work. And if the Packers coaching staff and the Packers general manager are making their decisions based on what happens in a preseason game against Baltimore, I think that this is a terrible situation to be in. And the body of work is clear that Toure is not at that level.
And you mentioned the preseason game, Neil. I think that a lot of what they are looking at came more in those 2 joint practices in Denver Thursday, Friday. And I believe there's a joint practice with Baltimore this week as well. That's where I think they're getting a lot more coaches study as opposed to film study compared to what the actual game is going to be on Saturday.
What about tight ends? How many of those are we going to keep?
Well, we know we're keeping two. Musgrave and Kraft are going to be in there. And I think Ben Sims, certainly, the way he made the roster last season and stuck around on the roster. Tyler Davis, such a question mark because of his injury last year. And I think that last year in training camp and the preseason games, he had the dropsies. He had too much of a problem not catching the ball. But now your tight ends are a big factor in your special teams. Have we had enough of a look to see what Ben Sims, Tyler Davis bring to the table in special teams?
I think the challenge for Tyler Davis is that he just kind of sucked ass, though, against Denver. And he was actually the lowest rated Packers offensive player by PFF grades. And it was especially his blocking that was at issue. And well, if he's a tight end, it's, backup tight end for the Packers and he can't block, I think that's a real problem.
And then the other two guys, Joel Wilson and Messiah Swinson, again, coming back on practice squad. A guy playing tight end wearing number 43, the odds are already stacked against you. But Joel Wilson, they gave number 82. So you have to believe they've got a little faith in him in some manner, that just by the number that they give a kid.
And Wilson did look good against basically every Wilson looked good against Cleveland. So, if you had Wilson on the back of your jersey, you had a good game against the Browns.
And all of this kind of leads up to how many people are you keeping? You've got a 53-man roster. How many do you keep at each position group? I think we're set at 2 quarterbacks. It's probably going to be 3 running backs with 1 going on IR, probably 3 tight ends, 6 or 7 on the receivers, but that really affects that offensive line. And that's why I think the Packers are really relying heavily on guys that can play multiple positions. And we got to see Sean Rhyan playing center, actually, showing more versatility.
Yeah, Sean Rhyan has been a player I've watched now for 3 years. And I went to one of the days of training camp early on, and it was certainly enjoyable to watch the positions. And even early in training camp, it's clear that they were working on him, not just being the John Runyon replacement, but being able to play right guard, center, and left guard. And you saw that in both games. He was the starting center, actually, in the game against Denver. And after basically the first series where he played right guard, he played center for the whole rest of the first half and then played left guard in the second half. Sean Rhyan got a lot of work in both of these 2 preseason games. And I don't think it's a case of trying him out or seeing where he's going to fit. It's giving him the reps such that he has that ability to be the 6th man. And the question is really, if Jordan Morgan is ready, it seems to be that they're leaning towards him as the right guard, but Sean Ryan's going to be the first guy off the bench for any of those interior positions.
So how many offensive linemen do you think they'll keep then?
That's a good question. And I only have 8, on the sheet that I put together. So you're starting 5 in Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Morgan, and Tom. Your rookie Jacob Monk is going to make the team, and Sean Rhyan, as we talked about. And as strange as it sounds, I think Andre Dillard is your swing tackle, is your other guy that's going to make it. He's a veteran with some experience. When they signed him, there was a lot of negative talk about him. He's not the greatest offensive lineman out there, but he's giving you the depth. The fact that Royce Newman just is not going to get back to any form that shows that he's ready to play in the league. And then a lot of your other younger guys, Kadeem Telford, Caleb Jones, Luke Tenuta, they're just, they're too young, too raw yet. Travis Glover, a draft pick. These are guys that are, again, playing for practice squad time here coming up. It's possible that they only keep 8 linemen going into this.
Yeah, I mean, Andre Dillard, I think he's started in place of Tom quite a bit. And I think that seemed pretty clear that Dillard's going to make it. But yeah, Glover in particular seems overly raw. You take somebody that's huge like Caleb Jones, and while he looks impressive, well, we saw what that line did last night, and the tackles were not doing any of their running backs or their quarterback. They were not providing any benefit for their other players on the offense. And Tenuta and Telford had the exact same problem. I think there is a decent chance that, yes, we keep 8 on the initial roster and then pick up somebody who's a tackle who's cut by another team as the 9th lineman. I think we're going to keep 9 linemen in the end, but that 9th lineman may be a player who's not currently on the roster.
If they cut Newman, then they save a little bit in cap money as well. A couple $1 million.
I don't even think that matters. I think Newman is just kind of sucked ass, and that's the problem.
One of the things that I pointed out watching the game too, they had a young guy, number 61, named Lasita Smith. Smith is listed as both a guard and a center, playing center near the end of the game last night. He was snapping the ball left-handed. And that's one of those things that you don't really think about. It's not just a matter of putting that ball back. There's a lot of work that those centers put into to make sure that that ball hits the quarterback hands just right, so that the laces are there. You've got guys that, especially on shotgun snaps, they're snapping that ball so that that ball hits the quarterback just right. A lot of quarterbacks, they play with the ball once they get it in their hand anyway. But even going back to last night, there is a difference for a quarterback, the way that ball comes up from a left-hander versus a right-hander. But then taking a look at the very first play of the game, Neil, uh, who is at fault when there is a center quarterback fumble in the exchange? Is it the center's fault or the quarterback's fault?
It's got to be the quarterback's fault. It's never the
Right.
lineman's fault.
never the lineman's fault.
Gee.
Those linemen, center is a tough spot to play. I remember even just practicing it, just trying to understand the position, because there's a nuance to it that your quarterback and your center have to move in tandem with each other, especially when you're taking a direct snap. Now, shotgun snaps can be a little bit different. I will say this, though. I feel that it almost looked like, because it was Sean Rhyan, right? Sean Rhyan had that start there. It almost looked like he was doing a shotgun snap with Sean Clifford under center, the way the ball went up. And you could tell the way Clifford reacted with his arm going out, that he was like, what the hell is going on here? But that's just one of those things where thankfully it happened in the preseason. But on my roster, my prediction that I put together, I have only 24 offensive players on that. So with our 3 special teams players, that means I've got room for 26 defensive players. So there's a lot of spots that I think go really deep on this defense. And probably one of the big ones, and we've talked about this quite a bit, is that defensive line, the way that they are going to be able to rotate players on this defensive line.
We've basically got 2 rotations that could be considered ones. And especially you build in the younger players like Colby Wooden, and Jonathan Ford even has had a really good training camp, and Brenton Cox, another player who really had a beautiful, one of the top rated players in the game against the Broncos last night. We've got easily 10 guys in that front 4 that could make the roster. And this seems like a place where you really want to have extra bodies because of just the inherent benefit of rotation. The fact that we've always we've done rotation effectively for quite a while. And it's just an inherent nature of the big guys that they need more rest and they need to be going at full speed, and more bodies equals more guys going at full speed.
Well, and to benefit the outside rushers as well, with the 4 now up front with the hand on the ground, that just seems to be a much better fit for some of these players. We saw it, especially against, I think, the Cleveland, where there was success collapsing the pockets, and then the outside rushers would collapse in, and the guys were just, everybody was there to clean it up. And that's what I think they're really aiming for here, is to create that disruption, that chaos in the middle. And last night we didn't see it as much. You got a safety.
We had 33 players that didn't play last night who were projected to make the roster. And I mean, I think this is a problem, right? Right now we're dealing with, and we and all Packers fans are dealing with, recency bias of the piece of shit that we dropped against the Broncos. We had a really good game against Cleveland, and we showed a lot of things. Like Jordan Love may have only played 3 plays, but a lot of the starters on offense and defense played the full first half, and we looked really good. Let's go back to how good we looked as far as the offense and the defense against the Browns. And I'm really excited for what this unit is going to be able to do.
The biggest play for the defense in the Broncos game is the safety. A young guy named Zach Morton scored those 2 points for the Packers. Zach is 5th in the depth chart on the defensive side. He's even behind Kenneth Odemegwu, the international player that has a protected spot on the roster because he's part of the African development plan that they have. And, Zach Morton, it's like, great play, kid. Sorry, you're not going to make the 53-man roster because of it. And that's a thing that he's going to be able to talk about that the rest of his life. What a great moment for him. Not to take it away from him, but yeah, he's just so buried on the depth chart. He's not going to get in there. But what a blessing this team has. We talked about, our front 4 in Smith, Clark, Slayton, and Gary. And then you can interchange right away with Van Ness, Wyatt, Brooks, and Enagbare. That's 8 guys that are making the team. They are a lock on the team. Who else can get in there? Neil, you mentioned 2 of them. I think Colby Wooden, who was a rookie last year, had a great body of work last season. And Brenton Cox, same thing. This is a kid that came out of nowhere, and people just can't turn their head away from him because he's a good special teams player. He's a good defensive player. He comes in and does the job that he needs to do. He showed it again at game speed against Denver, and his practices have been pretty good as well.
The linebacking unit is one that we saw a lot of in practice. And We saw it against Cleveland. Obviously with Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper, this is something that this is going to be a very dynamic pairing, and throw in a McDuffie, and this is a group that is going to be able to do a lot of different things. And we saw evidence of that against Cleveland, not so much against Denver, but I think you add Wilson and Hopper. Those are two other people that are certainly locks as far as that linebacking core. And then the only question comes to whether we're going to keep a 6 linebacker. And my opinion is, given that we're more likely to be playing a 4-2-5 rather than a 4-3-4, I think that 5 linebackers is probably where we're going to end up. And we've got those 5 people set.
Well, Tyron Hopper led the team with 11 tackles in Denver. Christian Welch is the guy who came up with the interception. Not really an interception per se, just more of a finding the ball that's up in the air. And if they're only keeping 5 guys, I think Welch, unfortunately, could be the odd man out of that group, because I don't think you're going to get rid of your rookies in Hopper or Cooper, because you've got way too much invested them in draft picks. And Eric Wilson is a guy who, again, with his body of work over the last season here, is earning a spot. He's kind of going to probably just placehold that until Edgerrin Cooper is ready to go. But Welch is a guy that has been doing the work that he needs to do. He's doing the special teams work. He knows the position. He knows how. He's very conscious of the field, and that he came up with that interception. So it's hard to say that he's going to go, but that's the nature of that position, because with the hybrid positions of the linebacker and the safety, they're probably more likely taking a safety, moving him up in that dime slot, than taking a linebacker and moving him back.
With that abundance of safeties and cornerbacks, right? I mean, so how many do they keep there?
Well, that's the thing. I was back and forth on that. I actually do have Christian Welch as on the roster, taking 6 in the linebacker spot. But if you don't, because with that, I only have 4 safeties. So if you don't take Welch, who is the safety then gets to make the team? And you've got guys in Zane Anderson and Benny Sapp, who, again, special teams players, did a lot of work last season, but you also have a rookie in Kitan Oladapo. There's a chance that there's 4 rookies, 4 draft picks that aren't making the 53-man roster this season, which is going to be a big number, comparatively speaking, for the last few years in Brian Gutekunst's drafts.
Considering over the last couple drop, I mean, almost nobody didn't make the team.
Right.
So, I mean, that was pretty incredible that, they hit, or at least kept, all these draft choices. So yeah, it'll be something very different if there's a handful of recent draft choices that don't make the team.
Yeah, but John, I think that Oladapo is one who's actually going to make the team. He's made plays. He made plays against Denver. He's been making enough plays in practice, and he was a 5th round pick. I think Oladapo is one that is going to make the roster, and I think that's where your Welch battle comes into play. And I agree with you. It's going to come down to exactly how the coaching staff sees this team developing, and what's going to happen is we're going to learn how they're actually planning to play the defense by whether they keep a 6th linebacker or go with an additional D-back.
And the philosophy there is the overall defensive back group. I lean more towards cornerbacks than safeties. I've got 6 cornerbacks making the team, obviously, in Alexander Stokes, Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon, I don't think is going anywhere. And then I think Corey Ballantyne makes this team because, again, great body of work last year. He's still doing fine. And Robert Rochelle is a guy who really shows up on special teams quite a bit, and he's had some spot play on the defense. I think he got dinged up a bit last night, though, as well. I mean, is this a guy that they bury on IR or do something with him that they can sneak him through, waivers and things like that? But again, I like 6 guys, those 6 guys as corners. And then my 4 safeties, obviously, in Xavier McKinney and Javon Bullard, but Anthony Johnson Jr. and Evan Williams round out those 4. Like I said, I think Oladapo, to me, is at risk of getting exposed and getting moved over to practice squad.
So, John, I didn't hear you mention Kalen King. Are you expecting him to be cut then?
And you're right, I didn't. I really feel like the bottom 4 guys of this draft are not going to make it. And that's, Kalen King, Oladapo, Michael Pratt at our quarterback, and Travis Glover, the lineman. I think those 4 guys are at risk of getting exposed, going onto the practice squad. 4 guys not making it from the draft onto the 53-man is going to be a huge number compared to the last few seasons of what Brian Gutekunst's drafts have looked like.
On the other hand, when you make as many draft picks as we do, you're inherently playing that numbers game. And if a few people don't make it, I think that's perfectly fine. I think it's important for general managers to be willing to admit that they took a risk and their risk didn't pay off, and they're willing to cut that bet early rather. I mean, I've actually not been so excited about the Packers keeping every single draft pick the last few years. I think they've been a little bit too happy with themselves, and admitting that maybe you didn't make the right bet is a good thing for a general manager.
And even with my prediction here of my 53-man, I've got 3 familiar names not making the 53-man roster, and that being Royce Newman, the offensive lineman, Samari Toure, wide receiver, and I think Jonathan Ford, defensive lineman. I think those are 3 guys that have been around that I don't think are going to make this roster this year.
You stay around for too many years and you don't make the leap, well, that's what's going to happen. I think that's exactly what the situation is with all 3 of those.
And to round out the roster of 53, really just 3 specialist positions to look at. We don't have to worry about the entire special teams, but we have a kicker, a punter, and a long snapper. Our punter, Daniel Whelan, I think Neil was the MVP last night.
Very clearly.
Mhm.
Matt Orzik appears to be the guy that's going to be the long snapper, but it comes down to kicker. There is still a battle between Anders Carlson and Greg Joseph for this kicker spot. And Jeff, how did you feel last night when Greg Joseph went out there to try to get 3 points on the board?
Well, the fact that he didn't probably does not bode well for his chances of making the team.
Except you're assuming that Anders Carlson is kicking any better this training camp and this preseason. And I think this is a situation where Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt have at least shown things throughout training camp. Anders Carlson and Greg Joseph have shown nothing. They've been consistently inconsistent. They've consistently missed kicks throughout the entire training camp. And I think it's gotten to the point that we have to be a little bit concerned about who our kicker is going to be in the regular season.
So the question becomes, is it one of these 2? I don't think you can at this point blow the whole thing up and just, bring somebody else in at this juncture. But I mean,
why not, Jeff? I mean, Anders Carlson easily could go on the practice squad to continue his development. I don't think anyone based on his body of work is going to say he has to make an active roster. So why not pick up a kicker from somewhere else, from a team that has an abundance of kickers?
Well, because there is no abundance of kickers. The street is not lousy with kickers out there. If it were, it would be a different story. Kicker is one of those commodities. What does Andrew Brandt always say? Kickers are like lawyers. You don't think about them until you need a good one, right? It's, we've been blessed with having a good kicker for many, many years in Green Bay. And now it's like, oh, now we're thinking about a kicker because we need a good one. And I just, is there someone out there that's clamoring for a roster spot that is saying, gee, I hope Green Bay picks me up? I just don't see it. I don't think that, and if there is a guy out there that's saying, hey, I could get a roster spot, there's probably a dozen teams that need a kicker.
Is it guy named Mason Crosby?
No.
And as much as, we all love Mason Crosby, the strength we knew 2 years ago wasn't there. There was a reason he didn't, get onto a roster or stick on a roster last year. He didn't get any better by sitting out for a year.
Granted, but now that we have the new kickoff with the coveted landing strip, that's sort of his bailiwick there. That's where he was kicking when we wanted him to kick it in the end zone. He didn't. Now, when he doesn't necessarily need to kick it in the end zone, maybe I don't know. It's intriguing.
Yeah, that's one of those things where it's still, I think strategy-wise, it's going to take me a bit to get used to and to figure out, because the touchback is at the 30 now.
Yes.
Putting the touchback at the 30 incentivizes not kicking it into or through the end zone. So do you say, gee, let's get a not strong-legged kicker to do that? Or do you take a strong-legged kicker and teach them to kick with a little more, hang time?
But the hang time doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter until you catch it. Hang time is irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly. With that said, Neil, who has the advantage? The kick team or the receiving team, based on when that ball is caught and when you can start moving?
I think the receiving team is going to come up with some incredible plays. There's going to be some real creativity as far as NFL play calling this year on special teams. There's going to be a lot of ass hattery where you're just going to say, what the fuck did my team just do in order allowing this stupid play to occur, right? It's been stated that kickers are going to be making more tackles this year. And I think the creativity on the kickoffs is something that is going to be spectacular to watch because yes, there is more room for things to happen. And when things happen, they're going to happen really quickly. I am looking forward to it, except when it kicks us in the ass, but be that as it may.
And we got to look at how a free kick after a safety is handled as well. From the 20, they just line up in different spots 5 yards from each other. My point being, I think the kicking team has a slight advantage because their eyes are downfield. They're going to see when the guy catches the ball. As soon as he catches it, that's when they can start moving. The receiving team, you have to keep your eyes back. So now you have that, and then you spin around. Now you got to pick up your guy that you're blocking. There is a slight advantage to the kick team. It may be nanoseconds of advantage, but it is there, that concentration, that ability to pick up what's next. And like you said, Niels, the next thing that's going to come up is what kind of plays do you run? Are you able to run some type of stunt or something like that that affects your ability to return that ball?
I'd rather be attacking than reacting in that situation. Shit's going to go down. It's going to go down quickly, and it's going to be, oh, fuck, what the hell am I doing? And the team that is on the offense is going to have the advantage here.
Absolutely.
Agreed, because I think you can run misdirection plays. You can run, I think there's way more advantage to the receiving team, like Neil said, because you can get really creative. Because, I mean, the kicking team, they're standing there 5 yards away with their schlong in their hand, waiting, right? There they are, okay. Whereas
I missed that.
But you can get really creative, like I said, and if your return guy is fast, I think that, to Neil's point, it's just going to be chaos back there, like catching the guy, and it's going to be forcing, the kickers to either push the guy out of bounds or try to make a half-ass tackle, which probably isn't going to end up very well.
But I think you're also going to see different formations. I mean, not formations per se. You're going to see different alignments of people, and that, okay, we're going to have our standard people who are the 11 on the return team. And then you get behind late in the game, and all of a sudden it's going to be like 4 wide receivers, 5 running backs, and 2 tight ends. And it's going to be a completely different skill set. And you don't even know what the skill set is going to be that you're going to be addressing.
Nope. I think it's going to be fun. And it still looks weird though. It really takes a little getting used to. And I wonder if they're going to keep the landing strip graphic on like during the regular season, or if they're just going to keep it on just for the preseason, just to get everybody warmed up.
Well, everybody likes looking at a good landing strip, don't they, Jeff?
Indeed they do, John. Indeed
they
do.
I haven't seen the onside kick yet. I understand the concept. You've got to declare, okay, we're going to go back to onside kicks. So again, I think revamping everything is at least adding, like you said, Neil, a little bit of excitement, a little bit of change for the season. So we have something to look forward to.
And something else to look forward to is a home preseason game this Saturday, right, John?
Yes. Saturday noon game in Green Bay. Packers hosting the Baltimore Ravens. Weather forecast, Jeff, for Saturday is partly cloudy and a high of 85 degrees on a noon game. You're going to roast sitting in the stadium this Saturday.
I'm going to spend most of my time at the Lot 1 tailgate.
Yeah. So. And we have that as, yes, stay hydrated. Come to the Lot 1 tailgate party and get prepared for the game. We will be there. Every home game, doesn't matter, preseason, postseason, green or gold package. So we will be in our normal spot in Lot 1. We'll have the Shotsky set up. And if you remember from the end of last season, I put together a special playlist of just love songs. I'm going to bring back the love song playlist for the preseason game. 2 hours of songs with love in the title or in the lyrics somewhere. I even added a couple of songs to go with it to make it a nice hearty 2 hours long. And that's what we'll be featuring in the tailgate party, along with some of the usual stuff that we do at the Lot 1 tailgate party as well. So come on by and say hi and enjoy the Lambeau Field experience with tailgating on Saturday.
Looking forward to being back in Green Bay for this weekend's game. It's a preseason game. That's okay.
And that's your final thought, right, Jeff?
Yeah, exactly. It's in the parking lot, Lot 1. summer. Looking forward to it. Visiting
You know,
mom, and it'll be fun to be in Green Bay.
and like they say, it's preseason for everyone. I don't expect a big tailgate party this week, but we'll be there and we'll be having fun nonetheless. Hey, next week we got roster cutdowns. We got a game in Brazil to get ready for. Neil, what's your final thought?
We've been dealing with things like this, like the Packers training camp guide, and during the game yesterday, just sort of going through and, well, who the fuck made that play, and why do we have 3 number 17s and things like that, and we're almost done with that. We're ready to be back to real football soon.
Oh, you want me to rant about jersey numbers again? Okay.
Damn it.
Wow.
All right. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe and leave a comment. Find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. On Facebook, it's the GBC podcast Green Bay Chat. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Night.